This is a production of Cornell University.
But most of you know me. I'm Lucia Viñale. I'm organizing the annual Hemp webinar this year. I am a third-year Ph.D. candidate in the Larry Smart Lab at Cornell University, and I'm working on hemp powder mildew. Today's presenter is Professor Nathalie Trottier from the Department of AnimalScience at Cornell University. She previously spent 25 years at Michigan State University, where she's now Professor Emerita. At Cornell, she teaches courses on companion and livestock animal nutrition and directs the Master of Professional Studies program in animal science. Her research focuses on amino acid metabolism, nutrient efficiency in pigs and horses, and most recently, an interest in the pharmacokinetics of cannabinoids and the nutritional application of hemp seed meal in horse and swine diets. As a quick reminder before we start, as we've been doing this before, please use the chat for greetings and other communications and submit your questions for Nathalie using the Q&A button. The talk would last approximately 40 minutes and we'll follow it with a Q&A session. We'll thank Nathalie at the end. And a reminder that we are recording the webinar and we are going to later upload it to our School of Integrative Plant Sciences SIPS YouTube channel. And with that, Nathalie, please take the floor.
Thank you so much, Lucia, for the introduction. So I'm going to share my slides here. All right, so welcome again, and thank you to the Cornell University Hemp webinar series for hosting this session. So today I'll be discussing the nutritional opportunities. Sorry, trying to get this going here. Presented by hemp seed meal, particularly in the diets of horses and sows. So here's what I'll cover today. The presentation is split into two parts. The first half, I'll be reviewing the digestive strategies of horses and pigs, the structural carbohydrate needs, in particular, the neutral detergent fiber, or NDF, and the scenarios when concentrate feeds are used for horses. We'll also look at the unique feeding behavior of gestating sows and the growing body of evidence that support fiber enrichments in their diets. And so how we can see really a place for hemp seed meal, in particular in pregnant sows, and of course, horses at all stages of their life cycle. So the second half of this presentation basically will focus specifically on hemp seed meal, its protein quality, basically how can it be sort of like how it is that it potentially be the perfect ingredient for horses. Just presenting some of the very, very few findings that we have out there for horses, but basically we can really make a good case study for this. And then finally, hope for sows. So we'll be using a little bit of data out there from pigs, growing pigs, and how we can extrapolate that to sows. So, it's difficult for me to really steer away from nutrition and physiology completely when I give a talk, because that's my expertise, right? But I think what I'd like to do here is make the case that pigs and horses, of course, are rely on fiber. Horses, being an obligate herbivore, must have fibers in their diet. So, just here a little bit of taxonomy briefly. I don't want to lose you or bore you to death, but some of you might find this also interesting, is that here we have ruminants, bovidae, cervidae, and we have our pigs. So those families belong to the order Artiodactyla. And to the right, we have horses, rhinos, tapir. These belong to the Perissodactyla order. And, besides the fact that those two different orders are separated by the fact that here we have uneven toes and here we have even toes, Suidae, or pigs, differ from the rest of these guys here in their digestive strategy. So we're looking at these guys being mainly ruminants. In terms of their digestive strategies, they have a complex stomach. They do foregut fermentation and rumination, except for hippos and pigs. So pigs are really interesting because they follow a digestive strategy somewhat similar to what we have in horses. They have a simple stomach. They have a highly developed large intestine. And so they do quite a bit of hindgut fermentation. And therefore, we're trying to, especially in the last 10 years, really push more fibers in pig diets, even in the little guys that just got a few weeks after weaning, as we have moving away from antibiotics and realizing that fibers serve as probiotics and providing those animals with potential additional gut immunity. So lots of fun stuff out there. So again, what I'd like to do here is move on and just contrast quickly here. So we don't get into nitty gritty of cats and dogs, but just to contrast that cats and dogs are very different, right? They have simple stomachs. The stomachs are large. There's no fermentation in the foregut, of course, but in their large intestine, cats very limited, and dogs moderate. And more we're seeing actually some fibers added in dog diets, and potentially hemp seed meal could find a place in dog diets at some point, replacing in part some of the flaxseed meal that is actually really popular in dog food. But that's for another talk later on, potentially, right? So here, let's look at the digestive tract capacity again to show you, convince you that hemp seed meal has a place in diet for pigs, but certainly for horses, right? So here, basically, this graph basically emphasizes how much digestive capacity in horses is devoted to the large intestine where fiber fermentation occurs. So we have the cecum here, the stomach, small intestine, cecum, and colon. Those together form the large intestine, right? So cecum in the pig and the horse and the dog, very tiny, very small capacity. And then basically the colon in the horse, very large capacity, followed by the pig and the dog. Again, not too much, but some potential. The point being here is that the large intestine in the horses consists of basically capacity-wise 65% of the entire GI tract, which is amazing when you think about this. And pigs actually is 41%, so it's quite important nonetheless. And then we have our dogs where we're thinking more and more that we should be increasing fibers in their diet. But it's definitely pigs, pregnant sows in particular, where we're showing more and more evidence that we need to push the fibers in their diets. Horses, number one, right? We always start with forage in their diet before anything else, right? So again here, so if we're looking at the slides, when we consider forage quality and alignment with digestive physiology, we look at NDF, right? So NDF, low NDF diets, typically under 5%, will provide a minimal fermentation support. Typically what you'd see in dog diets or carnivore diets. And then we're moving on to diets containing between 6 and 20% NDF, right? Which is the fibers that you find in the plant cell wall. So the structural fibers, not the water-soluble fibers or the rapidly fermentable fibers. So these are structural fibers that we find in the plant cell wall. In this case, basically moderate diets, provide some fermentable substrate, but it's really the high NDF diets, those between 45 and 60% that best match the fermentation capacity of hindgut species like horses. In pigs, fiber fermentation plays a lesser role, but still very valuable role, especially in sows where fiber is increasingly being linked to long-term productivity and improve gut health. This area is still developing, lots of fun stuff out there, and a lot of interest in optimizing fiber for pigs is really clearly growing. So again, clearly, what is this picture telling you? Besides looking a little bit scary, horses are obligate herbivores. They do require this carbohydrates that you find in the plant cell wall, number one. And then pigs, again, they would benefit immensely, especially sows, from a high fiber diet. Moving on here, let's look more specifically at the recommended fiber levels for horses, for example. For optimal digestive health, horses should contain a minimum of 40% NDF and ideally up to 60%. Now, these structural carbohydrates are found in plant cell walls and they ferment slowly in the hindgut. And this helps maintain a healthy microbial population and it reduces the risk of digestive disturbances. And that's why I keep looking at hemp seed meal as a really perfect feed for horses because of its very low starch and water-soluble carbohydrates. It's high fiber, very moderate fat content, but very interesting and relatively high protein content. We look here at what horses are fed. Number one, grasses and alfalfa as a legume. We're looking here, and what we see is the NDF content of those forages, which are basically, again, the plant cell wall structural carbohydrates, align with, what we're recommending those horses to receive. Right? So if we're looking at this slide here, you wonder why I have this horse picture with a large colon here and looking at how much room it takes in the abdominal cavity. Well, this is no joke, right? The problem with why structural carbohydrate matters is that non-structural carbohydrate, like the starch and the water-soluble carbohydrates, like the fructans and the simple sugars, for example, the non-alpha glucans, the oligopolysaccharides, the fructans, simple sugars, these guys ferment really rapidly in the large intestine. So what we really want is we want to have a diet with carbohydrates that are slowly fermentable, not rapidly fermentable. Slowly fermentable carbohydrates help stabilize the gut environment and are preferred energy source for hindgut microbes. So here, as a practical note, grasses and alfalfa, particularly when harvested at a more mature stage, because we want to harvest forage for horses for volume, usually, so they're going to be closer to a mature stage. They will naturally contain lower amount of starch. So here, you can see here, naturally speaking, they're low in starch, but they will be lower in starch, but lower in water-soluble carbohydrate when they are harvested closer to a mature stage. Okay. Again, protein levels in grasses align, even especially at the lower protein concentration, closer to grass maturity, aligns exactly where the horse's protein requirement is actually at maintenance. So when to add a concentrate feed? This is where hemp seed meal would be finding a home in horse feed. So while forage is the foundation of a horse diet, there are cases where a concentrate feed, also known as a ration balancer, is needed. Okay, it's especially true for horses that are working. They have an increased energy and protein demand. And when we have forages that are higher than 60% NDF, we're going to want to have a ration balancer in there to meet the energy and potentially the protein needs that might not be sufficient in just a forage. It's just a hay diet. So in that concentrate, our goal is actually to provide energy, but mitigating starch content. So we need to limit how much grain we can use in those concentrates. So could we have an ingredient that is actually providing quite a bit of fat, right? Moderate amount of protein to potentially replace entirely the soybean meal in those diets, replacing the flax seed, which is also a very popular ingredient in horse diets. Here we have to aim for 50% NDF of the total ration. So this is where we have a good potential placeholder for hemp seed meal. This is actually a picture of a polo horse here at Cornell. These horses require a lot of energy. So again, when to add a concentrate to this Timothy hay, for example. So here we have several grains and byproducts. What we would like to see in here is a great proportion of hemp seed meal. When to add a concentrate, a common scenario, again, is a working horse that has a limited access to a working horse, or scenarios where a horse has limited access to hay just because of weather, season, price, who knows? There's all kinds of different reasons for that. So this is where we want to maybe think about providing a concentrate that's going to be really high in fiber, for example, or even a balanced diet, a pelleted or extruded feed that is completely balanced or complete for a horse. An aging horse, right? Some aging horses cannot chew anymore on their hay. So this is where we start thinking about a complete diet, a complete feed that is going to be pelleted or cubes for these guys. Even though we know horses like they need the long stem, at some point they can't chew anymore, then we need to find a form of NDF packaged differently, right? So again, when to add a concentrate. So here, in terms of, let's talk numbers here. So the general practice is that we want to limit starch to 2 to 4 grams per kilogram body weight. In some cases, we really want to restrict at 1 gram per kilogram. So, high-risk horses and ponies that tend to get fat and have metabolic syndromes. So basically, I'm just going to give you an example here. If you have a balancer that contains 45% starch and the horse weighs 400 kilograms, you're limited to feeding this horse to about 900 grams of concentrate. If the concentrate contains 60% starch, then you're limited to 700 grams. So we're going to try to lower the starch content to 20% in some of the projects that we did, and to really provide a feed for horses that are at high risk, or simply just need an additional set of nutrients. Good practice is not to exceed water-soluble carbohydrate, 12%, or make sure that the non-structural carbohydrates that's inside of the cell, plant cell, is maximized at 20%. So the hemp seed meal profile is actually really interesting because it meets all these requirements. A little bit about pigs before we dig into more specifically about hemp seed. Anatomically, the sows are hindgut fermenters. Growing pigs are, but sows have a very large hindgut. Evolutionary, they have adapted to foraging a lifestyle, constantly eating diluted fibrous feed. They're naturally active, especially near the end of gestation, where they become hyperphagic. They eat a lot, and they're building nests for their piglets. So this natural drive plays a key role in how we should think about feeding strategies for sows. And we have been thinking more and more about this, but there's still a lot of room here to work with. So in contrast to their evolutionary feeding behavior, modern housing systems often restrict these natural instincts. Sows in the US and Canada are commonly limit fed with relatively low fiber diets. They're relatively inactive. They lack access to nesting behavior, combined with boredom and frustration. it results in stereotypic behaviors, which are repetitive, purposeless action, often linked to poor welfare. Let's admit. So again, limit fed, low fiber. Fiber is a little bit higher than it used to be, but still a lot of room, less active, no access to express nesting behavior. So that is actually giving us opportunities to think about looking for alternative ingredients to increase the feed or the fiber in those diets. Of course, in smaller swine operations, we provide an opportunity for more space, enrichment, the use of fiber-rich feeds to support both the welfare and the physiology. But as we are considering new ingredients like hemp seed meal, its potential to provide bulk and nutrition to gestating sows is undeniable. So, for sows, so what does the science say? A typical corn soy for example, corn DDGS contains about 14% NDF. Well, that's not enough for a sow. Fiber inclusion. So we've seen that studies have shown that fiber inclusion with soy hulls and wheat bran improves satiety and reduces stereotypic behaviors in limit-fed sows. When we are increasing NDF to around 18 to 20%, we have clear welfare benefits. We reduce oral stereotypies. We improve gut health. Our current studies, it's still in progress. We've been feeding 30% wheat bran during gestation. We show that it reduces constipation rate, dystocia, which is difficult farrowing or giving birth. It also reduces gestation length, meaning that it's a good thing. We don't have to intervene to induce farrowing by day 114 or 115 because those sows have to be timed for basically managing the unit. So it's good to have all those sows farrow in time. And with the 30% wheat bran, we didn't have to intervene at all and give drugs to those sows to induce farrowing. So again, here I want to recognize a PIC nutrition guide and Topic's Norwich feeding guidelines in addition to the studies above. A little bit more stuff here that is really interesting to mention. Again, high fiber inside diets, you can see that it really boosts the voluntary water intake during this period in late pregnancy, around farrowing and early lactation. You see high fiber, 22% NDF versus half of that, really pushes the water intake in these sows, which is essential to reduce constipation. Another really cool study that has been done looking at how fiber feeding actually increases prolactin serum concentration during this period around giving birth. And prolactin in itself being such an important hormone because it is essential for initiating and maintaining lactation. So the initiation of lactation could have something to do with the fact that with feeding wheat bran at this high level, we're able to actually induce farrowing in time for those sows to be more synchronized without to intervene. Another really cool study here looking at feeding roughage. Here we're looking at straw, hay, clover grass silage, corn silage or maize silage, and artichokes. And what we're seeing is basically the litter weight at day 35 being higher than control, okay, for the hay, the clover grass silage, and the artichoke. And we're looking here a little bit something different here as far as like individual pig weight here greater than control for the hay, the clover grass silage, and the artichoke, right? So again, some promising data here, promising studies. Just quickly, this is I had to mention this because to me this is so telling. Fiber addition, roughage, reduces basically lipopolysaccharides and C-reactive protein. Basically, looking at and these are endotoxins, right? And so basically this lower inflammatory markers in colostrum of those cells that are fed these roughages may help support neonatal immune development and reduce stress on the cell at farrowing. So in this study here, what Kesnell and all did is that they're providing high fiber feed to increase the NDF to basically to 32% here. So we're seeing the control 32%. So that when you see that, it's important to mention this because when we talk about hemp seed meal, we're going to have consequences as far as the nutrient profile. So we have all these ingredients here that are added to increase the fiber content. And when you do that, sorry about that, the lysine concentration, the true SID refers to similar to the true digestible lysine content of this diet reduces from 0.56 to 0.46. But look at the feed intake. We're also boosting the feed intake of those cells. So at the end of the day, the amount of nutrients daily requirement is met. What these people have shown is that clearly the average daily gain of those piglets is improved, and the litter gain also is improved when we start feeding those animals at day 25 of gestation. Keep in mind that cells' gestation length is 114, 115 days of gestation. In this, what I'd like to do here is that basically just mention here that the benefits that we just provided here are a strong justification for exploring novel fiber sources like hemp seed meal in cell diets. We've seen that we have positive influences on lactation performance and cell welfare. And this slide here is here because I wanted to show you that in terms of the crude protein requirement and the lysine requirement, again, this is on a digestible basis, we're looking at a lysine to crude protein ratio of about 5 and about 5.5 to 5.4. Okay, so these numbers, let's keep these in mind when we're looking at the lysine profile of hemp seed meal, because hemp seed meal with the lysine profile could actually replace about provide about half of the lysine in those sow diets because of its naturally good amino acid profile. So what I did here is I took this diet, let me go back here, okay, and I replaced the fiber part by hemp seed meal. So essentially having 58.5% of the diet as hemp seed meal. So I couldn't calculate the fermentable fiber percentage because I do not know how fermentable those fibers are. That's something else that we would have to look into. But you know, when we're looking at boosting NDF to 31%, right, is basically by replacing those fibers, we come up with the same fiber content as basically what we had before. Is about 32 in the previous diet. But look at the SID lysine, right? 0.66%. So we're above requirement. So we could lower this hemp seed meal and put something else in there. And of course, this is just a very crude estimate, right? I didn't go through, you know, all the nitty-gritty of the profile, but it's just showing you the potential here of filling that gap, providing this NDF to those cells, providing this bulk, because, you know, to reduce the satiety, to reduce this hunger, and because they're less active, they're in confinement, they need to be less hungry. That's basically the bottom line, right? So 31%, 32, 0.66 SID lysine versus 0.46. We're in good shape. So let's move on into looking at the protein quality of hemp seed meal and some of the work that has been done looking at protein quality. So here we're looking at amino acid composition, first of all. You've probably seen that before, but it doesn't hurt to revise this topic, right? So here, whole seed versus dehulled seeds versus seed meal, hemp seed meal, and versus the hulls. And what we're seeing here is that our hemp seed meal is we're going to go back to those highlight in a second here. We have a nice lysine content of 1.3% relative to the other products. And also one that is really interesting is the sulfur amino acids like methionine plus cysteine in hemp seed meal. One thing that I wanted to mention here, looking at this slide, is to demonstrate the variation in the coefficient of variation in those different products for lysine, right? So we go to hemp seed meal, we got 16 to 20% variation. So 22% for crude protein, 40.7, 22% variation. But hemp seed meal 16 to 28% for lysine in particular, and hulls is quite variable, right? So the more processing we get into, we're going to get into some of the losses as well, or the variation, right? Now, this is getting a little bit more interesting here as we're looking at comparing hemp seed meal products to other products of interest. So here we have flaxseed meal, which is really popular in horse feed. And so we have a soybean meal, again, very common source for protein for horse feed and of course for pig feed here in the States. Flaxseed meal, or which is also called linseed meal, more so in Europe, and hemp seed meal. So this is the amino acid profile, and this is the amino acid profile relative to the crude protein content. And so we're looking here at 3.3 for soybean for lysine, 1.4 and 1.4 here for flaxseed meal and hemp seed meal. So similar in this study. In terms of the protein quality or the profile here, 6.2% of the protein is composed of lysine, 4% of the protein is composed of lysine in the flaxseed or linseed meal, and 3.2, right? Which is actually a really good number where we're considering where to use and how to use hemp seed meal for horse feed, which are animals that require relatively low protein diets, and for gestating sows. Again, here you have your hemp seed meal along with flaxseed that are offer great opportunities for sulfur amino acids, more so in the methionine for hemp seed meal. This is a little bit complicated, but I just wanted to mention that this study was done in rats using rodents, and this is more applicable to human, where we actually look at protein quality and the protein digestibility corrected amino acid score. You might have a speaker that did talk about that in terms of human application. Again here, cold expelled hemp seed meal compared to cold expelled linseed meal, a little bit less in terms of their protein digestibility corrected amino acid score for lysine, but then for methionine, and both in terms of the score and the PDCAA, superior by far for your hemp seed meal products or hemp products in general. The variation in digestibility, and that's going to be true for all animal species we're going to be testing in, is that, you know, the more the NDF, the lower the protein digestibility. But we're still looking at really relatively high protein digestibility, anywhere in the bird of 95 plus to, you know, over 95%. So 85 to 95%, which is excellent. If we're looking here at this really nice study that was done by Hook, Presto et al. In 2011, there's really not a whole lot of studies out there looking at hemp seed meal compared to linseed, canola meal, and faba bean and soybean meal. Here what we're seeing is that very high NDF in hemp seed meal, beautiful lysine content, a little bit lower than canola, a little bit lower than legume and soybean, but fair in comparison to linseed meal. And of course, our sulfur amino acid content are way up there. And what's even more interesting is the total tract and intestinal digestibility of pigs that are fed hemp seed meal and other protein ingredients. Again, here, drawing your attention, there's a lot of numbers, right? But if we're looking here at apparent digestibility for hemp seed meal compared to flaxseed, canola, bean, and soybean, what we're seeing here is on an apparent digestibility basis, hemp seed meal is doing really well. And these are inclusion rate near 25% of the diet in those pigs, okay? So a quarter of the diet containing hemp seed meal. Now we're looking in terms of putting this into true digestibility values for the pigs. We're doing really well again here. You know, in terms of lysine, same as flaxseed or canola, lower than legume, which is not surprising, and lower than soybean meal. Although soybean meal was not part of the study, I added this column here, so that's why there are no letters for comparison. Really good digestibility for methionine, and really not much difference between the other amino acids. So again, really good quality protein, highly digestible for pigs. Now, if we're looking at for horses here, I call this the perfect feed ingredients because of the composition of this product. Looking at the proximate composition, crude protein, you know, will vary. So here I've used the data from Springer et al. That did a really cool study looking at palatability of hemp seed meal in horses. And we'll look at the data right here. But, you know, when we look at MDF, hemp seed meal is very high. Beet pulp is high too, but the MDF, high content of MDF in beet pulp is, a lot of it is due to basically pectin, right? There's a lot of pectin in beet pulp. And then we have our rice bran and commercial concentrate, and just here as a standalone standard are Bermuda grass, for example. The crude fat, you know, this is a 10.7%. I've seen 12% crude fat. Rice bran is 17%, and we like to use that in horse feed because of its fat content. And of course, it has some MDF. Of course, it's bran, but it has a high fat content. And but when I look at basically comparing hemp seed meal to those other common products, it has a nice profile, doesn't it? Right? So here, in terms of non-structural carbohydrate, which was what we're looking for a lot of time for some good feed for a horse balancer, non-fiber carbohydrate or non-structural, non-fiber, starch content, water-soluble carbohydrate, and simple sugars. Hemp seed meal is going to be low in all those compared to common feedstuffs in horse concentrates or ration balancers. Very low starch content among a lot of them, except for rice bran. You can see more starch in there. So again, low starch, low water-soluble carbohydrate, low simple sugar, high NDF, going back to my proximate composition here on top, relatively nice content of fat, and a little bit lower in energy because of the NDF. Nonetheless, I think that we have some really good potential here again for pregnant sows and horse concentrate. Here, I just wanted to stress again how content of starch in grains makes it difficult to mitigate the starch concentration in horse balancers when we want to get the energy level, and then we have all this starch that we're bringing in. So always some worries here that we need to balance for. If we look at acceptance of hemp seed meal in horses, and this was the study done by Spring et al. We're having a 6 days of repeated offering of 1 kilogram of either hemp seed pellets or Bermuda grass. And, you know, this acceptance study, you know, those horses are giving a limited amount of time to consume. So they're not consuming the entire amount that you're giving them necessarily. But what's interesting is that once these horses got used to this hemp seed meal, it's a novel ingredient, they never ate it before. They were used to this coastal Bermuda grass. Slowly but surely, it's different, still different, and then it starts getting similar. And by the time these horses have reached 5 days, they're basically same 4 to 5 days as the horses as basically preferring or consumption of grass. And then by day 6, superior intake, superior acceptance. So definitely very palatable for those horses. Again, here another comparison done with not the grass hay this time, but beet pulp, very common, very popular ingredient, soybean meal, and rice bran pellets. And what we're seeing here, comparing to hemp seed meal, we have much greater palatability of the hemp seed, greater than soybean meal, and similar to the rice bran pellets, which is a very popular ingredient again in horse feed. So we did a small study, it's still ongoing, and this is in preparation to a much larger study that we're going to be beginning next fall and next spring. That was funded by the Department of Ag and Market and FFAR. So this is basically a sort of a pilot study still ongoing. Because in this study by Spring et al., you know, we were looking at relatively smaller intake. We wanted to push it to a 40% inclusion rate in a balancer and see how these horses would do. Also, this project was meant to look at digestibility. So we still have not received all the data on the internal markers, such as lignin, to be able to give us, you know, what we need to figure out the digestibility of nutrients. But what we did is we provided 4 different concentrate at increasing inclusion rate of hemp seed meal, and we offered those concentrate slowly until we reach a 0.4% of the horse's body weight as a full concentrate. So this was the ratio of hay to hemp seed. And here what we're seeing is that again, this is our diet. We're reducing the amount of oats, reducing the amount of soybean meal to almost no soybean meal, increasing our hemp seed meal percentage for this concentrate from 10 to 40%. We kept Timothy pellets constant, corn constant, and corn oil. And so the crude protein, these are the analyzed values, repeating this diet here to see if there was an error with the analysis, but they were all around 20%, should have been all around 20% crude protein. And see the increase in NDF here, so we pushed it to about 30%, that was the goal, and minimizing starch, you know, to 22.4. And so what we did here is that we had some Amish company that built us some really cool manure bags so we can have clean manure collection with no contamination with the ground. And so we can basically collect this feces over a 6-hour period or whatever period we want to collect for, as long as we empty the bags as it gets pretty heavy. So these are, you know, different color-coded to mix the different diets here for the students. And so initial results, basically no refusal of concentrates. They consume on average 0.87 kilogram of hemp seed meal per day, so almost 1 kilogram of hemp seed meal per day. Basically, we were showing that we could reduce the starch intake to less than 1 gram per kilogram body weight with this concentrate. The control diet was relatively low in starch to begin with, lower than what you'd find out there, actually, because I was trying to be very careful, because these are, you know, Cornell horses, research horses, want to be careful what we do with them, what we expose them to. So I was being conservative with the control diet here. Again, no change in weight, and fecal score was normal throughout. These horses did really well. And in conclusion, the hemp seed meal palatability in horses does not differ from that of rice bran, and basically is superior to other common feeds used to formulate concentrate or ration balancers. Sorry about the typo here. Inclusion rate of 40% in horse ration balancers or concentrate is nutritionally complete, palatable, and safe for horses at risk of large intestinal dysfunction and metabolic diseases. So low starch, moderately high in fat, high in NDF, and adequate in lysine to crude protein for horses. And then for sows, we have hope, right? So here we did a very small study, a couple of small studies. This is in addition with the other studies that have been done looking at digestibility. So in this one, we did 2 small studies. One was for acceptability, because we couldn't find data on that. I could not find data on acceptability. And also looking at whole tract digestibility, not small intestinal, but whole tract. And we did here is we formulated those diets, you know, to contain up to 15% hemp seed meal. These are growing pigs. You have to be careful how much you can add in terms of fibrous food, because it can limit their feed intake and their nutrient intake and their growth rate if the aim is to grow those animals for production, right? Which is not the case for pregnant sows. But nonetheless, basically we decreased the wheat bran to 0 and increased the hemp seed meal. And so this way we could have a diet that was balanced as close as possible for NDF. That's the best we could do here, but keeping the SID lysine constant to meet the requirement without adding crystalline amino acids, right? So a step further would actually to be working with real refined diets and adding crystalline amino acid to target our amino acid level if we need to. So we had several constraints here, but nonetheless, if we're looking also, we had a very high fat diet because we had so much NDF in there. So in order to meet the energy requirement. And what we're seeing here is that those pigs ate gobble up the food really well for all the different diets here to control 10%, 15%. And the daily gain, the pigs fed the 10% did well, but they kind of crashed a little bit at the 15% inclusion rate. And so that the gain to feed ratio going to the 15% was lower compared to control and the 10% hemp seed, or tended to be lower. And this other study that we repeated just using control and 10%, again here we didn't find difference in feed intake and daily gain. And then we did whole tract protein digestibility, no difference between the two. Feed to gain, again, I'm sorry, gain to feed. Sorry if I said feed to gain before. Hopefully I said gain to feed. Is going to, again, here showing that there was no difference, right? So final conclusion here, so I can wrap up a little bit later than I was hoping to. Not too bad. So hemp seed meal amino acid profile is comparable to that of flaxseed and canola meal, which are, you know, sources of protein in growing pig diets in certain regions, a superior source of sulfur amino acids. And again, this amino acid profile to me is something that I see a lot of potential, more so in pregnant sows that don't require as much lysine or amino acids compared to an early growing pig. Hemp seed meal amino acid digestibility does not differ, in some cases is greater compared to other protein supplements. And then that the meal could provide half of the lysine in gestation diets and 30% NDF. So that's just a really powerful ingredient. At 10% inclusion rate, we maintain growth rate, feed intake, and gain to feed ratio. When we increase that inclusion rate, we don't maintain feed intake and the rate of gain in those pigs. The total tract digestibility was the same, whether we have 0 hemp seed meal or 10%. The palatability of hemp seed meal for pigs is indicative of palatability for gestating sows, and undeniably. And then we really need, of course, larger and longer term studies. And we need to looking at pregnant cells as well. We can't just use, growing pigs as proxy for cells. But I think that we have pretty good evidence. We could hypothesize that those cells would do pretty well on this product. Finally, fermentability potential of hemp seed meal is really needed. So we need to have a better understanding on how fermentable the fiber in hemp seed meal is. With that, I'd like to acknowledge in hemp, especially Trey Riddle, for helping me, supplying me with the hemp seed meal I've needed to have for those pilot studies we've been conducting and helping us actually move forward with a larger grant. Larry Smart and Joel Watchlab, which are great mentors to me and basically made me discover the wonders of hemp products, my students, and of course the Cornell Teaching and Research Funds. Thank you so much.
Thank you. That was wonderful. Learned so much about this topic. I'm going to use my host privileges to ask the first question. So would the hemp seed meal be replacing another ingredient that is being used, or it plays more of a role of complementing the rations?
So the question is whether we're looking at replacing everything with hemp seed meal, or can we look at it well, it depends, right? So if we look at the horse studies, those horses they were just offered hemp seed meal pellets without anything else in the concentrate, and they just love this diet, right? Love this product. So we know that it could probably be used as, perhaps as a main fiber source, potentially, if we have all the supply that we need, right? These horses eat a lot, right? So the availability might be the constraint here, not so much the nutritional potential, right? But as a complementary ingredients, of course, I think it has to do with availability, not so much a nutritional constraint, in my opinion. But more work is needed, right? Yeah.
Yeah. No, we can work on the availability side.
Oh, we can. Okay,
yes.
we'll have to talk. Okay.
And then we have a couple questions in the chat. The first one from Tyler: have you looked at feeding hemp forage to sows and horses?
So let's see here. Which question is that, Lucia? I'm trying to see the questions from. I see that the webinar chat. I'm sorry, and
there should be a Q&A with a red.
Oh yes,
bubble.
I see it. Thank you so much.
Yeah.
Okay. Sorry, I wasn't a good student. I should have listened to you better before. So basically, have you looked at feeding hemp forage to sows and horses? No. But I think it would be wonderful. One thing though that we have to keep in mind is the cannabinoid profile, perhaps in the leafy part of the plant. Right now we're looking at the seed products. So we are, I think, the constraints here is residues, cannabinoid profiles, on whether or not that could be ever approved by Center for Veterinary Medicine or FDA and AFCO because of the concerns with cannabinoids. So, but I do think that, assuming that they're palatable, it would be great. It would be great to try that. Michael asked a question. We recommend hemp seed meal for chickens. Yes. In fact, we have hemp seed meal has been approved for laying hens. Some of you might know this, but it's been approved, and also chickens, we're having a broiler study here that is beginning this fall or spring, and looking at inclusion rates, how much we can include of hemp seed meal in broilers, looking at meat quality, growth rate, feed intake, and all these good things. So we'll have a better idea of what it looks like for broiler chickens. I would say 8 months from now. So here I see, could you please share a bit about the specific hemp seed meal you're using for these studies? Is this whole seeds, pressed, sterilized, roasted, etc.? So my understanding is that these are basically they've been expelled. So the oil has been removed. We're down to about 10 to 12% fat. And very low starch, right? So we have low starch, high NDF, moderate amount of fat. So this is basically, they've been expelled, and to remove the oil, right? Hopefully I'm answering your question, TJ here. Trey is on the call, maybe he could jump in. Tom, is the hemp seed used for the feed studies dehulled, and is dehulling required? My understanding is that these are not dehulled because the NDF content is quite high. So again, correct me if I'm wrong, Trey, if you're here, or anybody else from in hemp. Denise, are you noting hemp seed meal, which is from pressed oil? Yes, you are noting, yes. Is that the only version of hemp feed looked at? Is the whole seed or ground dehulled seed? Is whole seed or ground dehulled? So we're going back to the question before to some extent. With the NDF content, these are likely not dehulled. Again, I have Larry here that is Morgan and Trey. It is expelled. Thank you. Press whole seed. Wonderful. Yes. So they're not dehulled. Yeah. With that kind of NDF, I would have been surprised. Thank you so much, Larry, for helping. Oh, Tyler. Thank you for the insightful talk, Natalie. Nice studies. Well, thank you, Tyler. So Denise, again, hopefully we've answered your question. Also, is the only version of hemp feed looked at basically right now in terms of those studies? Yes. But I'm sure there's going to be lots more to come here the next few months or years, as this is becoming a really hot topic for good reason, right? Judson, very informative in presentation. Thank you. Thank you, Judson. I appreciate those comments. Oh, Larry here is saying that we are seeing adoption of high oleic soy for dairy feed due to increase in milk production. Is the fatty acid content of hemp seed meal oil important for sows and milk production? There is a high oleic hemp line we are just starting to evaluate. Well, in the interest of time, I decided not to talk about fatty acids because I felt I had so much to cover to kind of set the tone a little bit about what we're looking at for animals and what kind of digestive system they have. But in terms of fatty acid profile, again, this is something that in sow lactation is of great interest, especially as we're looking at health of those piglets. I think there's a lot of potential here to looking at high oleic and the fatty acid profile of the milk that those sows would be fed with different hemp seed products, definitely, and the impact on piglet growth. Sarah, how was hemp seed meal stored? How long can it be stored without refrigeration? concern over mycotoxins or rotten during storage. Again, I'm going to need the experts here. I think that, okay, in the case of my studies, when we received the hemp seed meal, we placed the hemp seed meal in a facility that is dry and not warm. Basically, it's environmental temperature regulated, wasn't cooled, and we had it for about 3 months before we started the trials. As far as like long-term storage, there is some potential issues because of the fat content and rancidity. Again, I would not want to get into this area because I would prefer leaving that to some of those experts like Larry and Morgan, of course, and then Trey. But super important question, right? We have a comment here from Sarah, I think to everyone too, but I wanted to highlight that these are expensive trials on high value animals. Absolutely. Thank you for being careful with them, trying to improve all aspects of animal feed. Thank you. Thank you, Sarah, for the great comment. It means a lot to us. And all this stuff wouldn't be possible without our students, the hemp growers, my mentors. I call them my mentors, even though they're not official, Larry and Joe. And all the staff around us. So, and 2 more studies, right? We're going to have a big trial coming up with horses, dairy cows, and chickens this upcoming year. So we're looking forward to doing all that good stuff. So the feed smells really good, by the way. So when we're mixing this feed, my student always go, I want to taste it. I'm like, well, you can go, but I don't want to be responsible. Right.
Thank you. Thank you so much for your talk. And these are really important studies indeed. I want to remind everyone that we've recorded the webinar and we'll be uploading it to our SIBS YouTube channel soon. Thank you, Nathalie, and everyone for connecting, for joining us today. Have a nice rest of your week. Goodbye.
This has been a production of Cornell University, on the web at cornell.edu.